Billionaire arrived home unannounced and saw his son working as a servant. His next move was unreal. The private jet hadn't even finished cooling on the runway when Ethan Blackwood made the decision that would tear his world apart. No calls, no warnings, no security advance. Just one black car cutting through the rain-soaked streets toward a mansion that, until that moment, he believed was the safest place on earth. Thunder rolled overhead as iron gates opened, and an unexplainable pressure tightened around his chest, an instinct he'd learned to trust in. Hostile takeovers and brutal negotiations. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Inside the mansion, silence screamed louder than any alarm. No laughter, no footsteps. No music drifting from the grand hall. Just the faint, rhythmic scrape. Scrape echoing across marble floors. Ethan followed the sound, heart pounding like a war drum, until he stopped dead in the doorway, blood draining from his face as his eyes locked onto a sight so shocking his knees nearly buckled. On the floor, kneeling like a servant in his own home, was his 8-year-old son. Daniel Blackwood, heir to billions, child of privilege. The boy Ethan had sworn would never know fear was scrubbing the marble with a rag so worn it was nearly threadbare. His small hands were raw and red. Dirt streaked his cheeks. His shoulders shook with every breath, not from effort alone, but from quiet sobs he was trying desperately to hide. Ethan couldn't breathe. The boy sniffed, wiping his nose with the back of his wrist, whispering under his breath like a prayer. Please, please come off. I can't do this again. I can't. A drop of water fell onto the floor. Only it wasn't water. It was Ethan's fist clenching so hard his knuckles split. Daniel. The name left Ethan's mouth like a ghost escaping a grave. The boy froze. The rag slipped from his fingers. Slowly, as if terrified of what he might see, Daniel turned his head. When his eyes met Ethan's, they didn't light up. They didn't widen with joy. They filled with terror. I'm sorry, sir," Daniel cried, scrambling to stand, slipping and falling back onto his knees. "I didn't mean to stop. I'll clean it again. I promise." "Please don't tell her." Ethan dropped his briefcase. The sound echoed through the mansion like a gunshot. "Who?" Ethan said slowly, dangerously. "Told you to call me, sir?" Daniel's lips trembled. He looked past Ethan, toward the staircase, toward the upper floor, toward fear. Ethan followed his son's gaze, and in that instant, something inside him cracked beyond repair. This house, this fortress of wealth and power, had become a prison, and his son was its smallest inmate. Ethan knelt, ignoring the cold marble soaking through his tailored suit. "Daniel," he said gently, though his voice shook beneath the calm, "look at me." The boy hesitated, then obeyed. Up close, the damage was impossible to ignore. Bruises faint but unmistakable on thin arms. Soap burns on his hands. Dark circles beneath eyes that should have been carefree and bright. "You're not in trouble," Ethan said firmly. "You hear me? You have never been in trouble. Not now. Not ever." Daniel blinked, confused. "But Miss Clara said if I didn't work harder, Daddy wouldn't love me anymore." The words hit Ethan harder than any betrayal he'd ever faced in business. Miss Clara. The caretaker. Personally vetted. Glowing recommendations. Trusted with the one thing Ethan valued above all else. Ethan's jaw tightened until it hurt. "Where is she?" he asked. Daniel swallowed. "In the study. She said I had to finish the floor before dinner, or I wouldn't eat." Something ancient and violent stirred inside Ethan Blackwood. "Go to your room," he said, gently lifting Daniel to his feet. "Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone. I'll come get you." "But what if—" "No one will touch you," Ethan said, his voice iron now. "I swear it." Daniel nodded and ran upstairs. Ethan watched until his son disappeared behind the door. Then he stood. Every step toward the study felt deliberate, controlled, like a predator choosing the moment to strike. He opened the door. Miss Clara looked up from her tablet, startled. "Mr. Blackwood? You weren't scheduled to be home until—" "Explain," Ethan said quietly. She forced a smile. "Explain what?" Ethan closed the door behind him. The lock clicked. And in that moment, the most powerful man in the city made a decision that would shatter lives, expose secrets buried for years, and prove that true monsters don't always live in the shadows. Sometimes they wear polite smiles inside beautiful homes. And Ethan Blackwood was about to become something far more terrifying than a billionaire. The silence inside the study was suffocating. Miss Clara straightened slowly, masking her surprise with practiced composure. She had always been good at that smooth voice, gentle smile, the posture of someone who knew how to appear harmless. Ethan noticed everything now. The way her fingers tightened around the tablet, the microsecond pause before she spoke, the calculation flickering behind her eyes. "Mr. Blackwood," she said calmly, "if this is about Daniel, I can explain. Children from privileged homes often need discipline, structure. You hired me for that." Ethan didn't raise his voice. That terrified her more than shouting ever could. "Discipline," he repeated softly, "is making my 8-year-old son scrub floors until his hands bleed?" She exhaled, annoyed now. "He's dramatic. You know, children exaggerate. He spilled juice earlier and—" "You told him I wouldn't love him," Ethan cut in. The color drained from her face. I may have said something along those lines," she replied carefully. "Motivation techniques, emotional incentives, they're effective." Ethan took one step forward. Then another. "You starved him." Her chin lifted defensively. "Consequences teach responsibility." Ethan stopped an arm's length away. His reflection stared back at him from the glass cabinet behind her perfect suit. Polished shoes, a man the world feared in boardrooms and courtrooms alike. Yet he had failed at the one role that mattered most. "I trusted you," he said. "And I served your household," Clara snapped, losing her composure. "You're never home. Someone had to raise that boy. Someone had to make him strong." A humorless smile touched Ethan's lips. "Strong?" he echoed. "You mistook cruelty for strength. A common error among small people." Her eyes hardened. "You think you're better? You abandoned him for money, for power. At least I was present." That was the moment Ethan realized the damage went deeper than bruises. This woman believed she was right. Ethan turned away without another word. "Mr. Blackwood?" Clara called after him, panic creeping into her voice. "We should talk this through. I have a contract." "You'll be speaking to my lawyers," Ethan said flatly. "And to the police." Her tablet slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. "You wouldn't dare," she whispered. "The scandal alone." Ethan looked back at her, eyes cold. "There will be no scandal," he said, "only consequences." He left the study and pulled out his phone. One call. That was all it took. Within minutes, the mansion was no longer quiet. Security flooded the halls. Lawyers were alerted. Authorities were contacted. Every camera feed was secured. Every record pulled. Clara was escorted out screaming. Her mask finally shattered as she begged, threatened, and cursed. Ethan didn't listen. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time and stopped outside Daniel's bedroom. "Daniel," he said softly through the door. "It's Daddy. She's gone." There was a long pause, then the lock clicked. The door opened just enough for Ethan to see one eye peeking through. Fear still lived there. That hurt more than anything else. Ethan knelt again. "I'm here," he said. "I should have been here sooner. I'm so sorry." Daniel's face crumpled. He threw himself into Ethan's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. The sound broke something inside Ethan that money, power, and pride had kept sealed for decades. He held his son tightly, rocking him as if he were still a baby. "She said you didn't care," Daniel cried. "She said you forgot me." Ethan closed his eyes. "I will never forget you," he whispered fiercely. "Never again." That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He sat beside Daniel's bed, watching his chest rise and fall, haunted by every missed call, every delayed return flight, every moment he chose business over being a father. The mansion felt different now, colder, hostile, like it had betrayed him. By morning, Ethan Blackwood had made another decision. One that would shock his board, terrify his enemies, and change his son's life forever. At dawn, he walked into the kitchen and fired the entire household staff. All of them. By noon, headlines exploded across the city. Billionaire CEO cancels all business trips, steps down temporarily. The board panicked. Investors demanded answers. Analysts speculated wildly. Ethan ignored them all. He pulled Daniel out of private tutors. He canceled overseas deals worth billions. He sold the mansion within a week. And then quietly, without press or announcement, Ethan Blackwood disappeared from the world he had built. 3 months later, in a modest neighborhood far from the skyline, a boy rode a bicycle down the street laughing as his father jogged beside him, pretending to lose the race. Daniel laughed freely now, but the scars hadn't vanished. He still flinched at raised voices, still apologized too quickly, still checked faces for anger. Ethan noticed every time. And every time he responded with patience, with presence, with love. What Ethan didn't know, what no one knew, was that the nightmare wasn't over, because Clara hadn't acted alone. And the truth about who allowed the abuse, who ignored the warning signs, and who benefited from Ethan's absence, was about to surface. And when it did, the billionaire who walked away from power would return, not as a businessman, but as a father with nothing left to lose. The first sign that the past had not loosened its grip came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Daniel was sitting at the small dining table, carefully coloring a picture of an airplane, one of the few things that still made his eyes light up when the doorbell rang. He froze. The crayon slipped from his fingers. Ethan noticed immediately. "Hey," he said gently, crouching beside him. "It's okay. I'll get it." Daniel nodded, but his shoulders stayed tense, his gaze fixed on the door as if it might bite. Ethan opened it to find a man in a charcoal suit standing under a black umbrella, mid-40s. Expensive watch. Corporate posture. "Mr. Blackwood," the man said. "I'm Arthur Klein, Blackwood Industries. Board representative." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I stepped down," Ethan replied. "You know that," Arthur smiled thinly. "Temporarily. Which is exactly why I'm here." Ethan stepped outside and closed the door behind him. "What do you want?" he asked flatly. Arthur lowered his voice. "There are concerns. Investors are nervous. Certain internal audits have raised questions that only you can answer." Ethan laughed once, humorless. "Funny. When my son was being abused under my roof, no one had questions." Arthur's eyes flickered. "We were unaware of the situation." "You were warned," Ethan said. "Twice." Arthur stiffened. "That's not documented." "No," Ethan replied. "It was ignored." Rain dripped from the edge of the umbrella. The silence stretched. "There's more," Arthur said carefully. "Miss Clara has filed a counterclaim." Ethan's blood ran cold. "On what grounds?" "Wrongful termination, defamation, emotional distress." Ethan stepped closer. "She tortured my child." Arthur didn't deny it. "She claimed she was following guidelines," he said. "Policies approved by who?" Ethan demanded. Arthur hesitated. That hesitation told Ethan everything. "Get off my property," Ethan said quietly. "And tell the board this. If they push this, I won't just come back. I'll burn the whole rotten structure down." Arthur swallowed. "You'll destroy the company." Ethan leaned in. "No, I'll save it from people like you." He shut the door. Inside, Daniel was still sitting at the table, eyes wide. "Who was it?" he asked. "No one important," Ethan lied, smiling softly. "You hungry?" "How about pancakes for dinner?" Daniel nodded. But that night, after Daniel fell asleep, Ethan sat alone in the dark living room, the rain tapping against the windows like an accusation. He pulled out his laptop. If the board had ignored warnings, if policies existed that justified cruelty, then Clara was only a symptom. The disease was deeper. Ethan began digging. Emails, archived memos, old HR files he hadn't reviewed in years. He bypassed security protocols with ease. He had designed half of them himself. What he found made his stomach turn. A character development initiative. A euphemism. It outlined harsh disciplinary methods for children of high-profile executives designed, allegedly, to build resilience and reduce entitlement. The program had been piloted quietly off the books, approved by a subcommittee. One name appeared repeatedly at the bottom of the documents: Arthur Klein. Ethan clenched his fists. This wasn't negligence. It was design. The next morning, Ethan made another call. Not to lawyers, to an investigator. "Off the record," Ethan said. "I want everything. Names, payments, cover-ups. I don't care how ugly it gets." The investigator paused. "Once we start, there's no going back." Ethan looked at Daniel, asleep on the couch, clutching a stuffed bear Ethan had bought him at a gas station during one of their long drives. "Good," Ethan said. "I'm done going back." Days passed. Then weeks. Daniel slowly began to heal. Therapy helped. So did the simple routine school drop-offs, movie nights, burnt pancakes on Sunday mornings. Ethan learned to tie shoelaces properly. Learned which stories soothed Daniel at night. Learned how much damage silence could do. But peace never lasts when truth is hunting. One afternoon, Ethan returned from the grocery store to find the house eerily quiet. "Daniel?" he called. No answer. His heart slammed into his ribs. He dropped the bags and ran through the house. Empty. The back door was open. Ethan sprinted outside. Down the street, he saw a black SUV pulling away, and Daniel's red backpack on the pavement. Something inside Ethan snapped. He didn't call the police. He called the investigator. "They took him," Ethan said, voice deadly calm. "If my son isn't home in 1 hour, I expose everything. Names, documents, recordings. I go public." The investigator swore. "Ethan, listen to me." "I'm done listening," Ethan said. "I warned them once. They didn't listen." 58 minutes later, the SUV returned. Daniel stumbled out, crying but unharmed. A man shoved him gently toward the house and drove off. Ethan pulled Daniel into his arms, shaking with rage. "I'm okay," Daniel whispered. They said you should stop digging." Ethan kissed his hair, eyes burning. "They underestimated me," he said softly. That night, Ethan released everything. Documents, emails, testimonies, financial trails. By morning, the world was on fire. Executives arrested. Board members resigned. Blackwood Industries stock plummeted. Arthur Klein disappeared. And Ethan Blackwood became the most dangerous man in the country, not because of his wealth, but because he had chosen truth over power. Yet even as the empire collapsed, Ethan knew one thing. The final reckoning hadn't come yet. because the person who authorized the program, the one who signed the very first approval, was someone Ethan trusted more than anyone, and that betrayal would cut deeper than all the rest. The name stared back at Ethan from the screen like a loaded gun. Margaret Blackwood, his mother. Founder, visionary. The woman whose portrait still hung in the main lobby of Blackwood Industries, eyes kind, smile reassuring, the public face of ethics and philanthropy. Ethan felt physically sick. He reread the document 3 times, hoping, praying he had misunderstood. But the digital signature was unmistakable. The authorization date went back 12 years, long before Daniel was born, long before Ethan had taken over as CEO. Margaret had approved the Character Development Initiative as a pilot program. Her justification was written in calm, elegant language. Children raised in extreme privilege must learn discipline early. Hardship builds leaders. Shielding them from discomfort weakens the future of the company. Ethan slammed the laptop shut. "No," he whispered to the empty room. "Not you." Margaret Blackwood had been ruthless in business. Yes, but at home, she had been firm, never cruel. Or so Ethan had believed. He spent the night pacing, memories twisting into something unrecognizable. The strict tutors, the boarding schools, the punishments framed as lessons, the emotional distance he'd always explained away as necessity. Had it all been part of the same philosophy? At dawn, Ethan made a decision. He was going to confront her. Margaret lived in the original Blackwood estate, an enormous, glass-walled mansion overlooking the ocean, now mostly empty. She was 78, frail in body but sharp as ever in mind. When Ethan arrived unannounced, she was in the conservatory, trimming orchids. "You look terrible," she said calmly, without turning around. "Sit down." Ethan didn't sit. "Did you know?" he asked. She sighed. "That tone tells me you already know the answer." "Did you authorize it?" he demanded. "The program, the abuse." Margaret set the shears down carefully. "I authorized discipline," she said, "not abuse. My son was beaten, humiliated, terrorized in his own home." Margaret turned to face him. "Pain is not always cruelty," she replied. "Sometimes it is preparation." Ethan laughed, a sound close to breaking. "You sound like them." "I sound like reality," she said sharply. "You think the world is kind, Ethan? That power forgives weakness?" She gestured to the ocean beyond the glass. "I built everything you inherited by never flinching, not once." "You destroyed a child," Ethan said. "My child." Her expression flickered for just a second. "I protected the future of the company." Ethan stepped back, disgust flooding him. "You lost your humanity," Margaret straightened. "And you lost your edge. Resigning, exposing us, choosing emotion over legacy." He met her gaze. "If legacy requires sacrificing children, it deserves to burn." Silence filled the room. Then Margaret smiled sadly. "You always were too soft," she said. "Just like your father." That was it. Ethan turned and walked out without another word. He never saw her again. The fallout was absolute. Governments launched investigations. Child welfare agencies reopened decades-old cases. Former program participants, now adults, came forward with stories that mirrored Daniel's pain. Margaret Blackwood was stripped of all honors. Her charitable foundations dissolved. The Blackwood name, once synonymous with excellence, became a symbol of corporate cruelty. She died 6 months later, alone. Ethan did not attend a funeral. Daniel, meanwhile, began to change. Slowly, carefully. Therapy helped. So did stability, love, the simple certainty that no one would hurt him again. One evening, months later, Daniel asked a question Ethan had been both dreading and hoping for. "Dad," he said quietly, "are you rich?" Ethan paused. "Why do you ask? Kids at school say you're famous, and that our house is small for someone famous." Ethan smiled gently. "I used to be very rich." "Used to?" "I gave most of it away." Daniel frowned. "Why?" Ethan knelt in front of him. "Because money didn't protect you. And if it can't protect the people you love, it doesn't deserve to stay with you." Daniel thought about that. Then he hugged him. "I like pancakes better than mansions," he said. Ethan laughed, tears burning his eyes. "So do I." Years passed. Ethan never returned to Blackwood Industries. The company was broken apart, sold, rebuilt under strict international oversight. His shares funded victim reparations, therapy programs, and new child protection laws. He lived quietly, taught business ethics at a small university, wrote a book no one expected to read and millions did. Daniel grew strong, confident, kind. One day, as a teenager, he stood in front of his class during a school assembly. "I learned something important," Daniel said into the microphone. "Power doesn't show who you are. It reveals it." Ethan listened from the back row, heart full. That night, Daniel asked him one final question. "Do you regret it?" He said, "Losing everything?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "No," he said. "I gained you." Daniel smiled. And for the first time, the past finally loosened its grip, not because it was forgotten, but because it was faced